we know that certain things are wrong. And so I'll make one other point real quick, and that's just that if we have other reasons to believe that the Old Testament is a message from God, then I think that would especially give us reason to have trust seeking understanding. To say, I trust that God has morally justifiable reasons for what he did, even though I can't understand it. So if there were things like, I think that we have things like scientific foreknowledge in the Bible. Okay, I'll wrap up. Scientific foreknowledge, or there are things like fulfilled prophecy, things that are indications of the supernatural. Plus, you have Jesus, who I think we can know historically rose from the dead, and he said that the Old Testament, that those books by Moses were by Moses, and that they were a message from God. So that would give me reason to say, okay, well, maybe I'm misunderstanding the ancient Hebrew, or maybe God had other reasons, or maybe I don't understand all the circumstances, that kind of thing. Okay. But those are just some thoughts. But that was, I know that was kind of a long time, a lot of stuff but please take equal amount of time, and please, what are your thoughts on that? Okay,
and are we doing 12 minutes this time?
Yeah, 12. Yeah.
Part of my 12 minutes, I want to take something that you talked about. You're not sure whether Deuteronomy 13 included babies in that second part. Deuteronomy 13 itself is really just two parts, saying, if anybody in your family, to include your kids, is worshiping other gods, kill them with the edge of the sword. And then it says, and by the way, if another village is doing that, go make sure it's true, and then kill everybody over there. And you could argue maybe there was no kids. But we had a few verses, or a few passages, and I think Numbers 31 is one of them. And I wouldn't mind 31? Taking my 12 minutes, part of my 12 minutes, to if you want to look it up.
Sure.
But I think that one actually does specifically say, kill everybody, to include infants.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, I just want to say, last week there was another famous debate between James Tour and a science promoter. He's not a scientist or a professor, but he calls himself Professor Dave. I don't know if you guys saw this debate, but it was awful. I mean, they ended up screaming at each other and being awful. He and I are not doing this. In fact, one of the reasons we're doing this is to say it does not have to be this way. And when I talk about these verses, I don't mean to be like shouting them at you, like, oh, look at this, you have to defend this. I could just say this is what bothered me. And I do think there were some passages that said to include the babies, and that kind of threw me back.
I wrote down all the passages that we talked about. Okay. This is copied and pasted from the email. Okay. This is not one of the passages. Okay, all right. But that's okay. I haven't had a chance to look up the context.
We can table that for later.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Because I'm not sure where in Numbers 31. I'm not one of those atheists.
The other one you mentioned was 1 Samuel 15:3.
Can we read that one?
Okay, sure. Yeah, 1 Samuel 15:3.
When I grew up reading the Bible, I familiarized myself with the Bible, and again, I was a teenager, and in my young 20s, it probably took me 5 or 6 years to kind of walk away from it. And then once I became an atheist, there was a stage where I was like, you've got to read this and make sense of this. And then I began to realize I don't like this either, so I kind of walked away from that as well. So I'm not the kind of person that's like, I know the chapter and verse better than you do, because I don't anymore. I think that the Bible was written by people who were inspired sometimes and radicalized sometimes, and some of those passages seem like someone who's angry, and some of those passages seem like someone who's inspired.
Okay. So this is Samuel giving a revelation to Saul, and he says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he set himself against him on the way while he was coming up from Egypt." By the way, if I didn't mention it, 1 Samuel 15, because I'm starting in verse 2. Now go and strike Amalek and utterly destroy all that he has, and do not spare him, but put to death both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Then Saul summoned the people and numbered them, and so it talks about all the numbers. Saul came to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the valley, and then it goes on to, I don't know if you want me to go, it gets into the details.
That's good enough. I just wanted to make sure that it included the kids and the infants there.
Right.
That's the thing that bothers me. And first of all, I've heard someone say, what if you could come from the past into modern day and see a surgeon working on an infant, and the surgeon's got a knife and he's digging into the infant, you'd be horrified. You'd do everything you can to try to stop him, but you wouldn't understand that the surgeon is actually trying to save the kid's life. Right. I can see that. So there could be something about this that's actually, as you know, someone who understands something doing something that's important. I just can't imagine it. And, right. and I would imagine that God would know that I couldn't imagine it. And so if he saw me reading something that says, kill the infant with a sword, I think he would expect me to be like, what are you talking about? Right. And this is why some Christians like Greg Boyd is like, that should actually make you think, okay, this can't be God, because I'm reminded of Christ crucified, and Christ crucified kind of overcame this image of a warrior God that's going to be mighty and strike people down and smiting and all that sort of stuff. So that's why Greg Boyd can call himself a Christian scholar and just say, I don't think that God wrote this. And I think that makes more sense to me than to say there should be some good reason for this. Even though it could be, I think it makes more sense that it sounds like somebody who's angry and radicalized, and he's just saying it on God's behalf. We see that on Facebook and Twitter and all these other social media, on TV. People say, God wants me to tell you to do this, and and sometimes it's angry. Sometimes it's send me money or support this airplane I want to buy. But sometimes it's awful things. God wants me to tell you this, and I think that's something that humans can do. And I imagine that could be what happened here. I want to point out two things about my background. One is that I'm heavily biased about the subject of radicalization, because I've been in this world now since 1995, from the Marines to working in the federal government. So a lot of my day is reading people who are radicalized, and so I have this real big bias that when I see a politician, or I listen to a podcast, or I listen to a friend of mine talking, and I'm like, this guy's radicalized. I can see it, I can pick up on language. That's what triggered me, and I'll use the word triggered. Some of these verses, I'm like, yeah, I think this guy's radicalized, more so than God's radicalized. And so that's really my bias. If you ever want to catch me and say, hey, I think you're just biased and you don't want to let go of your bias, you probably got me there, because that really is a bias that I really do have. And then just a real caveat on radicalization. I've been giving presentations about counterterrorism outside of the Christian atheist world, just as part of my job. One interesting thing about radicalization is that there's two steps that you go through to become radicalized. And the first step is actually a good idea. And this is the weirdest thing that I ever encountered. The first step of radicalization is finding something that you think is important, and you decide you're going to commit yourself to it, and it can change your life. You can get up earlier in the morning, you can take better care of yourself, you can have more empathy for other people and say, I really want to share this idea. It's changed me, it's transformed me. That first step of radicalization is great. And so there's a lot of people who are radicalized who have just been great people and have done great things for the world. And I think sometimes when we hear the word radicalized, we think negatively. Sometimes it's not only positive, sometimes it's necessary. Like I think Jesus was a historical figure, and I think he was radicalized, but for something good. I think he was against what the Roman authorities were doing. I think he was against the way the Jewish authorities were responding to the Roman authorities, and he was against what some of the people, so he was kind of surrounded on all sides, but he took the stand anyway, and he was willing to keep going, even though there was even a time where his own family was like, dude, stop, and he didn't stop. So I think he was radicalized, but that is not negative. I think that was a very positive type of radicalization. So I want to point that out, that sometimes radicalization is good. Where we come in our job, and even in the Marines, where we would come in is if someone is radicalized towards dehumanization or killing innocent people, that's where we jump in and say, okay, now your radicalization has gone too far. So that's what I think of when I think of radicalization. And so when I read these verses, I think someone is radicalized towards thinking of certain people as no longer human. And in that situation, he might think, these babies, these infants are going to grow up to be like them anyway, so just go ahead and get rid of them now. That's how I think he saw it when he said that. So that's my approach to these things. Okay. To respond to some of the things you said, you talked a lot about how people might have deserved it and have been warned. And I'm all for that. Just like in the Marines, we had some guys that, sometimes we had arrested guys. We had caught them doing things, and we had arrested them. Maybe they weren't blowing us up, but maybe they were digging a hole in the side of the road because someone paid them $20 to dig a hole in the side of the road that somebody else would come and drop an IED in there to attack us. So we would arrest them for digging a hole. They knew not to do it. They knew they were going to be in trouble, and they decided to keep doing it. So I can see how adults get warned, and they keep doing it anyway, and they're held accountable, and I'm all for that. I think any human society that doesn't have some sort of accountability, you're not going to be around for long. So you got to have some sort of accountability. Where I take issue is that I don't think an infant would understand that. You know, like, stop crying. I told you yesterday, I know you're 3 days old, but I said to stop crying. It's not going to resonate. So I think that's why I think it's more likely that a radicalized person wrote it rather than a perfect creator telling us that that infant deserved it. Right. And then finally, I would say, this is my final point, I would say that if there is a perfect creator who says, hey, look, Adolf Hitler is going to come to no good, I am going to have him get struck by lightning, then that takes away anybody having to go take a sword to baby Adolf Hitler. You know, if he told me, if God told me, I'm going to send you back in time to kill Adolf Hitler with a sword, I don't know that I could do it. Even with all the atrocities that happened there, I don't know if I could do this. And maybe that's weakness, maybe that's, you know, evil, maybe the stain of atheism. I don't know that I could do that. But if God struck baby Hitler with the lightning, I'm like, okay, well, God in his infinite wisdom took care of that. And I can imagine, again, I'm projecting myself onto this creator. I can imagine a creator saying, don't worry about the babies, because if I have you guys killing babies with swords, then we've lost something there. We've kind of lost the plot there. I'll take care of that. You guys just do what I tell you, and if there's a time to fight, it'll be against other adults who, you know, that I need you to practice your warriorness or whatever, because we need to be warriors at times. But I don't see any aspect or improvement to warriorness by taking swords to infants. That's my pushback against it.
Okay, yeah.
That's my time.
Oh, okay. I'll just bring up a few things, and then we'll kind of start to wrap it up.
Is this, by the way, is this next part, is this timed, or is it?
We're supposed to have like 5 more minutes after that, but hopefully, yeah.
2.5 minutes extra, so.
Okay, cool. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So I noticed in talking about Deuteronomy 13, you picked up on the term I used, but I tried to like backpedal on my term. I said village, and I was like, well, it's not a village. But so part of the reason why I brought that up is because it does say in Deuteronomy 13, it says, you shall surely strike the let me back up. If people have gone out among you and have seduced the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go. Well, city, what does that mean? Well, it turns out that the ancient Hebrew word there is really, we have no perfect word for it now, but basically it would be closer to citadel. Well, people don't usually use the word citadel, so that's but it would be closer to, it's a fortified place where the military and the political leaders were. So these aren't civilians. These are sometimes religious leaders as well. Religious, because it was very tied in with the politics. Religious, political, and military were all within that. So these citizens actually lived in encampments around the fortified city. This is not actually talking about attacking citizens, non-combatants. This is actually talking about combatants. Okay. But then why would it mention, in some places, it actually doesn't here, but in some places, why would it mention men and women, like for example here, in 1 Samuel, it says both men and women, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and dog. Have you noticed that grammatically, that's kind of odd to have the and repeated. Usually you put and at the very end. Why is it? Well, these are called merisms. This is a rhetorical device called a merism. And it's actually, we see throughout ancient Hebrew, merisms are meant to say encompassing all. So it doesn't literally necessarily mean we expect there to be infants inside this citadel. And in fact, it says, now go and strike Amalek. Well, Amalek's dead. He's no longer around. Why is it saying strike Amalek? Well, it's talking about the city. And it goes on to make it clear later, Saul came to the city of Amalek. So it's the name of the city. And so again, we're talking about a citadel. So it's talking about the men and women, the children and infants, the ox and sheep, the camel and donkey inside the citadel. Well, this is most likely no children in there, most likely very few women. They would be part of this political, part of the combatants, part of it. They had ways of allowing women and children to escape as well. Historically, we see that for these citadels. Okay. So most likely they weren't included, but it's a rhetorical device to show, like, you got to go in and you got to eliminate this everything you find inside this military compound. So on my view, I would say that they're not actually killing infants. That's why Dr. Richard Hess, the Old Testament historian, says that he thinks, I have the quote here, but he says, I don't think they encountered any non-combatants in any of these. Now, I can understand you're saying, yeah, but that doesn't seem clear to me, because this seems like what I would expect. If I hear this on the radio, that sounds like radicalization. Yeah. But I think a Old Testament historian would warn you against taking your intuitive understanding, because you've developed skills of intuition. By intuition, I mean being able to pick up on those indications of radicalization.
Right, that's my bias, yeah.
Trying to use those in a group that's removed by 3,000 or 3,500 years, and where the original language has been translated into modern English, we're going to lose, there's going to be stuff lost in translation.
Okay.
But I'll mention one other thing real quick, and that is, on a Christian view, infants and children, I think, now not all Christians agree on this, but I think the Bible makes it clear that there is an age of accountability. Okay. And so we see a couple different passages that I think make it clear that there is an age of accountability. So below which you're not held responsible for your moral decisions. By God, by God. So for example, well, I won't have to try to find where I put it, but anyway. So my point is just that if children are below the age of accountability, they're not old enough to understand the consequences of their sin, they go straight to heaven. So they go to be with God. And so they're actually in a better place after that. If they are of the age of accountability or above, then they're already guilty, because all of us are, according to Genesis, we're all deserving of death. It's a mercy that we get any days on this earth, because after age of accountability, because we all do wrong things. Okay. Now, I took some of Richard's time there, and I don't want to be the one to have the last word, because I think it's important, out of respect in these kind of dialogues, to have. So I should give you a chance to go ahead and go ahead and take a couple minutes to give your thoughts on that. Okay, sure. I want to say, I guess for 30 years now, I've been where I sort of said that I'm no longer religious. And I've had these conversations and watched them happen many, many times, several decades now. And I have seen a lot of Christians say, well, there were reasons and you don't understand them. And I've even seen Christians that felt like they were compelled to try and think of maybe the ways the infants or the babies could possibly deserve it. That they were doomed to be, bad anyway, or, things like that. But one thing you did say, one of the arguments that you made here, is something that we could agree on. This could be an answer where you're saying it didn't mean it. It said it, but it didn't mean it. And that's where you said this was a rhetorical device. He said infants and children, but he didn't mean that, and that didn't happen. Great. But I wish, when I was being raised in my Southern Baptist school, I wish my Sunday school teacher had said, kids, you're going to read some weird stuff here. Stop. This is rhetorical devices. Never carry this out of the church and tell people this actually happened. That will be a violation of what we all know to be true. That would have been very helpful. And I know that, like, if you listen to podcasts right now, a lot of, the funny thing about left versus right is that 85% of Republicans identify as Christians, but 65% of Democrats identify as Christians. So there's millions of Christians who are at odds right now over some of these issues. And a lot of the people who are on the left who identify as Christians, they're not guilty of the things that some of the podcasters say, oh, they just want to keep sinning, and they just, some of them are like, I can't imagine that this is something that would happen to a baby. And I think some of them are deconstructing or walking away because of these verses, because they thought that God actually meant it, and they couldn't come to terms with it. And I think a lot of those people might be, I use the word saved, you might be able to find some common ground with some of them to say, yeah, I agree, that's awful, that would never happen, this is rhetorical devices, and that's actually, I think,
an opportunity for Christians to come to peace together. And then atheists like me, we're looking for some weakness to come in and cause grief. We can't do that. If you guys are like, yeah, we all agree that will be awful, and this was rhetorical devices, and sorry you don't like literature, but we all understand that. If you guys were like that, people like me would be out of a job, or at least out of talking points. So I think that's a good, for me, that's a good kind of a ending spot for us.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for the respectful way you raised those concerns. Thank you for the thoughtful and very clear way. I appreciate that you've thought about these things. You state your ideas very clearly, and you get all of us thinking. So thank you.
Great.
Let's see here. So we'll use the rest of the time for Q&A, if that's all right. So first of all, please, let's all thank Richard for,
Thank you.
So go ahead and when you ask a question, I'll try to repeat it because we are trying to record this, but you guys won't be mic'd, so we'll try to repeat the question.
Okay, I saw one with his hand up.
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My name's Dan Hunter, and I do have a question for you.
Okay.
For Richard?
I mean, you're not a true atheist, you're an agnostic, is that correct?
I see what you're saying. So,
To repeat the question.
okay, he's saying I'm not actually an atheist, I'm more of an agnostic. The history of the word atheism, and there's a lot of atheists that fight over this. A lot of atheists say, well, it's atheism is like the word atypical or asexual. If it's got the A in front of it, it means I'm not that. So an atheist will say, I'm not a theist, and that's the end of it. That's actually not the original word of atheism. The original word of atheism was like, hey, there's no God, and that's my claim, that no God exists. And I'm not as fierce as that. I'm open that there could be something. So in that respect, I would be more of an agnostic.
So you're not a true atheist, you believe there's a God, is that correct?
I don't believe there's a God, but I'm acting, for this particular debate, I'm acting as if we assume that moral thing is true, then that would cause a grief.
I'm not trying to argue with you.
I agree.
Figure out where you're coming from.
Okay.
With this conversation,
Yeah.
it didn't really connect.
Right.
Because I was told that an atheist would be here. So you are an atheist because you don't believe in God, you don't believe in Jesus. Is that correct?
Right. I believe Jesus was a historical figure, but I don't believe that a creator created us, or that the common definitions for a classical theist. I don't think that's true. I think our morality is our own. Like he said before, if there's no God, then we're all kind of making it up on our own. I think we're making it up on our own. But I did use that concept for this debate. I just assumed that moral law was true, and I said if that's true, that should cause grief for some of these passages.
Okay, well, and then my other question on chapter 13 of Deuteronomy. A child can't open up the book of Deuteronomy and look at chapter 13
Right.
without some explanation. There's a whole history of 3 or 4 of the books before
Right, that's true.
bring this into light. So
Yeah.
you cannot expect a child, and the answer to a child like that would be, number one is, well, you need to know who Jesus is, and you need to understand what the Bible says about Jesus and what the Bible says about God before you can explain anything like this to a child.
Right.
So, I mean, your point, and I don't get it. I don't get your point.
Okay. Maybe, can we try to, we'll try to formulate it as a question so it gives him a chance to speak. But it sounds like you're saying, can you explain, wouldn't you want, would you say your question is, wouldn't you want that child to also read the context?
No, but he was using that for an illustration, I understand that, but I'm using that on top of that illustration to point out that that's not a great illustration.
Okay.
I'm willing.
Against you, I mean, you're fine.
Right.
It's just,
I'm more than happy just to concede that, so we can have the next question. That's a good point.
I think your hand was actually up next. Go ahead.
So a little bit of background about me too. I was a Christian, and then I actually became an agnostic for 20 years of my life.
Okay.
And now I'm back at it, starting to research and try to get to know the truth, right?
Okay.
This is actually one of my problems, and something that I cannot overcome, because in my life, as an agnostic, I felt like, okay, everything that happens in my life is kind of judged by my understanding of the world, and what I seem to believe to be good or bad is based on how I was raised, my culture, my trauma experiences, whatnot, right? So I turned to the Bible for answers, and I turned to the Bible as an example of moral standard. And so when I read stories like this, and when I read stories about, Moses come off of the mountain and God ordering to kill 3,000 people, and no matter what you come across, just kill everybody.
Right.
For me, that's a radical view. I mean, nowadays, if we think about Hitler, he was a radical. He thought nobody that was not white needed to be put to death, right?
Right.
And so we condemn this type of people, yet we're supposed to find our moral answers in the Bible. And so
Right.
for me, that's a very hard pill to swallow.
Okay.
And I don't know how to interpret that to fit into my paradigm of, okay, I'm a Christian now, and I believe in a God that has this radical view. And it seems to me that this God is killing people because they don't follow him.
Right.
And so who are we to condemn Islam then when they're killing people because they don't believe in that Muslim view, right? So I have a really hard time with it.
Okay.
Maybe you can offer some clarification on
Sure.
how I should approach that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Thank you for raising a question you've been wrestling with personally, because I know it's hard to bring those things up. So just to repeat back to see if I understood correctly. So you're saying currently you're kind of more agnostic, but you're trying to understand, trying to investigate Christianity.
Yes, and
but you come across, you're interested in Christianity, but then you come across these passages, and you, for example, Deuteronomy 13, we're reading about these Israelites being ordered to kill other Israelites because these other Israelites are saying, hey, why don't you abandon that God and go worship this other God? You also brought up Moses. I'm not exactly sure. It seems like
it's in Exodus 32,
Right.
I believe.
Exodus 32.
Moses was taking too long with the time
Yes.
on the mountain, and then he comes back and
The golden calf.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And then so God orders him to kill 3,000 people. Whoever you come across, brothers, sisters, children, just kill everybody because they're worshiping a different God. So
Okay.
to me, it's almost like when I'm applying my morals that I have now and like looking at the world and what I come to understand as being true, that almost looks like, if you don't believe in me, I'm going to kill you. So that doesn't seem like a just and loving God to me.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
Can I bring up an idea?
Sure.
There's several Bible study leaders here in this room. I know one right now. But this questions like this could take like 20 minutes to answer, or they could be an opportunity for the Bible study leaders to like meet up after this and say, so that way we can say this is a good point, and then it can be an opportunity for
Sure.
That's why I'm here. You know?
Yeah, but I do want to offer. I do want to offer a few thoughts, and that is. Well, first of all, there's an article that was written by Dr. Clay Jones, who and it was called. In fact, I have a copy of it here with me. It's called "We Don't Hate Sin." Let's see here. We don't hate sin, so we don't understand what happened to the Canaanites. And his whole point is to actually rebel against our Creator is treason. And I actually brought with me the reference to the place in our own U.S. criminal code where it says one of the punishments for treason in the United States is the death sentence. Now that's today, 21st century. We say if you commit treason against the United States, you die. Now there are some other sentences you could end up, depending on how severe it is, but especially if you encourage others, if you start to get a group to commit treason against the United States, well then the death sentence is probably one of those that's going to come into play. So I think it's actually not that far-fetched for us to see that. If God really did create us, and not only created us, but gave us the abilities that we have, gave us the pleasures that we can enjoy, but gave us family and all these things, but then also died on the cross to pay for our sins, and all that, and then offers a free pardon. Anything you do wrong, you can be forgiven, and then if we then rebel against Him, I can understand Him being, if He's just also, not just loving, but He's also just, I can understand Him being a judge and saying, there's a consequence to be paid for rebelling against God.
But at the same time, one of the commandments is for us not to kill. And
for us, yeah.
And we're supposed to be in the image of Jesus Christ and in the image of God, and we're supposed to follow the commands that God has supposedly
Yes.
giving to us, but then he's doing the opposite of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So one of the 10 commandments is to not kill, it says. One important thing to realize is it says, actually, thou shalt not murder is actually the Hebrew term. It's more akin to our English word murder. To take a life is allowed in the Old Testament law. In fact, there are capital punishments. There are several places where there's a capital punishment, a death sentence. And so actually it's you shouldn't murder, which means to take a life, an innocent life, when there's no moral judgment being made. So God doesn't, what we see in the Old Testament is not God saying, well, here's an innocent person, I'm going to kill them. Instead, there's a justification given about guilt. This person has done wrong. In the case of Moses, they've rebelled against their sovereign. They've rebelled against their creator who just brought them out of slavery. He just freed them all, and then now they're rebelling. So he has the death sentence carried out. So I think that is a little different than the commandment that says thou shalt not murder. So that's some thoughts, but I do want to make sure we give, because I saw just before I called on you, with 10 or 20 hands went up. So
you choose.
Okay. I think you've had your hand up for a while.
I got a two-part question. Since you profess to be an atheist,
For Richard,
and don't
okay.
believe in a creator, I want to know how you think you got your intelligence, because we are the most intelligent people that God ever created. And two, where do you think you're going to go after you die? You're going to be dust and just blow in the wind?
These are two good questions, and I'll repeat it for anybody who didn't hear or if it wasn't heard on the camera. One is, how did everything get to be here to the extent that we have this intelligence, that we have the ability to reason and the ability to trust our reason? And if I'm an atheist, if I think that evolution is true, then I would have to say that there was just a series of accidents. Never mind the cosmos. Let's just say the Earth was already here. Let's say life was already here. You'd still have to say that I would have to go whoops, 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 and then suddenly we're here and we can trust ourselves. And that takes a lot of faith. And so that's why, I call myself the faithiest atheist, because I do think we're this extremely lucky species that gets to be here. We are intelligent, and we're certainly the only species that can build the networks that we build now. That's inspiring, and I don't have an answer for that. Even, there's even atheist scientists who say, we don't know how this happened. So one thing theists have over us is you can say, well, there's a creator that had to do that. So, you might have that over us. For me, I don't fight that so much, because I think it would take a lot for me to absolutely know for sure that all these accidents happened to lead to us. I'd probably have to be there and watch it happen before I absolutely agree that happened. I think that's what happened, and so that's why I kind of agree that I have faith there. And so that's my answer to your first question: why we have. Why we're here at all, and why we have intelligence, and why we can recognize that we have intelligence. And then your second question is, what happens after we die? And I think we fade to dust. And that's scary and it worries me, but I think that's probably what happens.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, could you please tell me how you figure Jesus rose from the grave?
So she asked, how did Jesus rise from the grave? If it's a historical fact that he rose from the grave, then how would that be the case with no God and no miracles? I don't know that he did. I think that people came to believe that he did, and then that story took hold, and people defended it, and it just became a common tenet for Christianity.